Welcome to i24NEWS' first edition of the National Security Podcast in partnership with INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies. I'm your host, Nicole Zedek. Each week, we'll have an in-depth discussion with expert analysts on some of the most pressing national security challenges facing Israel today. So, let's get started. It has been a heart-wrenching week for Israelis as the bodies of 6 hostages murdered in Hamas captivity are recovered in southern Gaza and brought back to Israel. They were executed by their captors just days before the IDF found them, begging the question if Israel's military pressure is helping or harming the plight of the hostages. Those who argue against military pressure want to see a hostage release deal and ceasefire. But despite months-long efforts, negotiations continue to stall. The United States is trying to make one last effort to reach a deal. Take it or leave it, the Biden administration is saying. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu won't accept a deal without certain security guarantees, doubling down on the Philadelphia corridor. All while the Hamas terror group has yet to accept any of the U.S. brokered deals. So is the time now or never? Should Israelis remain optimistic? Or are we deceiving ourselves into thinking a hostage deal is really possible? Well, to answer all of these questions and more, I want to introduce my guest, Professor Manuel Trajtenberg from Tel Aviv University, former executive director for the Institute for National Security Studies, first chairman of the National Economic Council at the Prime Minister's Office, chairman of the Government Committee for Social and Economic Change, and also a former member of Knesset. Quite the biography there, Professor Trajtenberg. Thanks so much for being with me today.
My pleasure, Nicole.
Right now, the main message on everyone's mind is that of the hostages, specifically following the devastating news we received this week. Nearly 11 months of fighting at this point, and really the hostages have become a symbol of this war, a reminder not only of October 7th, but the tragedies that Israel has continued to face since. So, Manuel, I wanted you to first take us into the psyche of Israelis right now and how society is feeling following this devastating news.
So, indeed, the hostage issue encapsulates both the horrors of this war of 11 months and the difficulties in extricating ourselves from it in a way that will ensure Israel's security a long time. So it's not a coincidence that there is so much going into this single issue, because everything is there. Okay, the tragedy, the hope, and, of course, the difficulties vis-à-vis the Hamas and vis-à-vis a divided Israeli society. But you rightly ask about the psyche, what Israelis are feeling these days. And I think that the way to approach it is beyond the pain, beyond the mourning, for the death, beyond the dread for what will come. There is, underneath all that, there is a question that looms very large. And the question is, how come? How come that, it happened to us? How come that the idea being the strongest and the best and the intelligence and so forth, we were dealt with this blow? How come also that in the 21st century, one can experience and witness such barbarism that was inflicted on us? The basic faith in the human being, the human condition, gets shattered. Because, these people were there. Some of them were working in the kibbutzim, and they were capable of such atrocities. So how come? You see, how come that, shortly after the October 7th, we have seen a rise of anti-Semitism all around the world. I mean, how come? You see, so there is that element, and then there is the question on how do we get out of it.
And that is where we're seeing a divided society over this question.
Exactly. So you have the how come issue, okay? Not issue, but feeling, existential wondering, see how come? And then, okay, how do we get out of it? And there, essentially, is where converge all the kind of the previous divide within Israeli society explodes also around that. And why is that? Because everybody understands, or I hope so, that if we go for a deal now, even in the really very tough conditions that a deal will require, okay, abandoning the Philadelphia corridor is not just a whim of the Prime Minister. It's a serious security and strategic issue. Yes, it is, okay? But then there are trade-offs. So you ask yourself, what should I do now? Relinquish control there, we pay a security price, but we have a chance of bringing back the hostages now and avoid further murdering of them in the tunnels underneath. And furthermore, if we do the deal now, there is a chance to have a deal in the north and therefore a chance to bring back our own refugees to the north, and there is a chance to maybe have a deal with Saudi Arabia and therefore form a common front vis-a-vis Iran, which is the biggest enemy and is the mind and the arms and the funding of all our enemies around. So there's a chance of that. So one big chunk of the population in Israel thinks that yes, we have to take the risks. It's not risk-free, but the alternative is worse. And then there is the Prime Minister and most of his cabinet, not all of it. The Defense Minister Gallant is actually with the first kind of approach and people that support them that said no. I mean, we have to stick to the basics, to the Philadelphia corridor and so forth, and be adamant about holding it, because otherwise we'll pay the price later on, and it will be a bigger price. So that's where we start.
And you mentioned what we're seeing with the large show and demonstrations right now is really speaking out against the current government, against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We have seen over the past week nearly 250,000 people taking to the streets of Tel Aviv alone, other demonstrations across the country. Yet Israel is no stranger to protests and demonstrations. Right. A decade ago, we saw these demonstrations about the cost of living. Yeah. Just last year, we saw demonstrations about the different court systems. Right. And now we're seeing, once again, these demonstrations. But could this actually impact what Netanyahu and his government is planning to do when it comes to the security situation and a hostage deal? Could these protests make a difference?
So, protests come and go, that's true. Some of them make a difference, some of them don't. And it's very hard to predict, you see, what the impact will be. But the sentiment right now in Israel of the vast sector of the population that adheres to what the thesis I expose, which is we need the deal in order to bring the hostages back and have the chance of having some sort of deal in the north and so forth. That sector of the population that was not active in the past, that was sort of complacent, that was kind of, the high tech, the good life in Tel Aviv and so forth and so on, they have said, no, now we are going to stand for what we believe is essential for the future of the country. There is a sense of urgency and of compromise. We need compromise in the sense that of commitment, not of compromise, of commitment that I never seen before to that extent in Israeli society. And I've been part of all sorts of movements, yes, in Israel, and I witnessed that and so forth and so on. But I took part of that, the extent of the commitment of the young generation that are saying it's our country, we are going to stand for the principles we believe in. We need to regroup. That's also very important to understand.
How so?
In the following sense, this war has taken a huge toll on Israeli society. Of course, those directly affected, the families of the death and the wounded and so forth and so on, the displaced people. But it has taken a toll on all of us. A psychological toll, a physical toll, and so forth and so on. We need to regroup. We need to kind of look inside, okay, and say, okay, how are we going to rebuild ourselves, our strength, our resilience? We need to essentially to have a different political, a different government, not because, I don't like this or that person, because the current government was elected on November 1st in 2022, a completely different situation. The reality has changed dramatically. So you need to elect a government that will command the support and the confidence of the people, the trust, given the situation we are in. It could be the same characters, the same figures, but you need a strategy to put on the table. And the elections should be about the strategy, not about the realities of 2022. Right now, the government doesn't have the trust of the people. All the polls show that, regardless of you are right or left, okay? They have around 25%, 28% when you ask people whether you trust the government. That's extremely low, okay? So we need that. We need a pause. We need to regroup. And we need to regroup also to rebuild our military might to confront the Hezbollah, to confront Iran.
When you're talking about what the public wants to see, though, specifically with a hostage deal, while we are seeing these mass numbers coming out in support of a deal saying now is the time, it needs to happen because time is running out. On the other hand, you are still seeing a large portion of the population not only staying home, but even some of them voicing their concerns against a deal. Because what a deal could entail, I don't want to get into any specifics, but basically we're going to see a certain number of hostages returned back to Israel in exchange for a certain number of Palestinian security prisoners, terrorists, released. And this is something that we saw back in 2011 with the Gilad Shalit deal. Where we saw 1,000 prisoners released for one person. And one of those prisoners released was Yahya Sinwar, who then created the October 7th massacre. So while we're hearing on the one side that a deal needs to happen now, the concerns of those against a deal are also valid when they have something like this to point to.
Absolutely. I mean, these are valid, serious arguments. I'm not at all dismissing them, as I'm not dismissing the Philadelphia corridor importance from a security and strategic point of view. This is serious. This concerns our future, okay? But what I'm saying is that right now, the compact of Israeli society, we need to see the hostages back. This is a precondition for us to reconstitute ourselves as the Israeli society we knew. The solidarity, the cohesion, the unity in front of external threats, and so forth and so on. That has been shattered.
I think that's what's missing in so many of the international and outside perspectives, because when you look at it from a security aspect, you can see these different reasons. However, you're breaking it down right now. It's the Israeli psyche and the Israeli heart that is broken, and that's why these hostages need to be returned.
Absolutely.
Some say no matter what a deal and no matter what price Israel might have to pay.
That's right. I mean, the price matters, and the negotiations are tough, but there are negotiations. It's not a kind of a one-sided negotiation. And the U.S. understands perfectly well our security concerns. So they are helping in that respect, okay, to put pressure on Sinwar and so forth via the Egypt and Qatar.
How exactly is the United States and Egypt and Qatar putting pressure on Hamas, and what kind of pressure could they also be putting to continue to put that? Because when we look at many of the statements coming out, even from the Biden administration this week, it's putting more pressure on Israel. And Netanyahu, once again, stating that Netanyahu's doubling down on this security guarantees, the Philadelphia corridor, it could harm a deal. But where is that pressure then towards Hamas?
Right. So one of the big problems all along, or the big difficulties in this war, is the asymmetry, is the lack of symmetry between we are transparent. We criticize our government openly.
Talking about a democracy negotiating with a terror group.
We're a terrorist group, that's right. So pressure is not something that can be transparent vis-a-vis the Hamas, because you are dealing with a terrorist group. So you see, what we see is the pressure put on Israel, and so there is this view in the world that perhaps we are the culprit, because if the pressure is being put on us, then we are the short side of the market. No, I mean, a lot of pressure should be put on Hamas. Hamas, at this point in time, they're enjoying the show. They're enjoying...
No incentive right now to agree to a deal.
Not only, you see, Nicole, they're literally enjoying the fact that I'm criticizing my government. I mean... That
the Israeli society is sort of divided right now and protesting in the streets against the government. This is exactly what they've been trying to do and create this unrest for nearly a year now.
That's right. And their thesis, okay, is that these internal divisions are going to undo us, okay, and bring us down to our knees. I have news. It's not going to happen, because if we can the same day, literally the same day, be in the streets of Tel Aviv demonstrating for a hostage deal, and then in the evening go to the army base, put the uniform, and go and fight with the same intensity in Gaza or in the north. That's Israel. And that is not going to change. That is us. It's both the democratic side, okay, and the security side, and the two sides coexist in each of us. It's the imprint that we have inside, and that's not going to change, okay? So I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about the hostages. I'm concerned about, again, kind of rebuilding our strength. I'm concerned about the fact that indeed we need elections to have a government that will have to take very tough decisions vis-a-vis the North, the Hezbollah, vis-a-vis Iran. We will do it, Nicole. Don't doubt it for a moment. I mean, Israeli society is the most resilient, the strongest, the most innovative, the most quarrelsome society I know, and I've been in places. I studied at Harvard in the US for 5 years. I've gone to sabbaticals. I was born in Argentina. I've been around. And this society will overcome all these difficulties. We are at a crucial point right now. We are at the T, in the road, at the point that, the options are diametrically right. The one thing I don't want is regret for the road not taken, if I need to quote.
I love this message of hope, given all of the circumstances. But what is the way forward then? And although you as an Israeli feel like, despite the images we might be seeing on our streets of societal divide, that's not the case. But do our enemies see that? Do our allies, our foreign allies, like the United States and supposedly Egypt and Qatar as well, do they see that as well?
Egypt and Qatar, they see, but they cannot understand. I mean, not because any intellectual shortcomings, because you see, the experience of a vibrant democracy is something that cannot be understood via the screen, the TV screen. It's something that you have to live, to be there, to be part of it, to understand. What's the difference between demonstrating in the streets and yet, performing duty in the army at the same time without hesitation, okay? That's something that they cannot understand, okay? But, and certainly not Qatar, okay, because that's a complete autocracy, okay? But I'm not criticizing, I'm saying that's a fact, okay? Now, the US does understand that, of course, okay? But, and here the but is important, we are 2 months away from an election in the US, exactly 2 months.
They have many of their own problems to worry about right now.
That's right. So what happens here and how the Biden administration conducts itself vis-a-vis Israel at this point in time is contingent upon the election campaign in the US. Again, that's a fact, and that's the way things work. I mean, it couldn't be otherwise. What I'm saying is that we have to be careful, okay, not to form an opinion about what's right or wrong in the course of action we take according to what it's being said in the U.S. because it's colored by the election there.
Their own political incentives.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to what we talked about, putting pressure on Hamas to reach a deal, because at this point, they have not agreed to any of the U.S.-backed deals. They're trying to put their own proposals forward, but what type of incentives might be there? And especially as an economist, are there types of sanctions even that we could be putting? Does it have to go to Iran? Does it have to go to where all of the Hamas billionaires live in Qatar? How can you actually incentivize Hamas to agree to a deal like this?
Right. So Qatar has the most levers in terms of pressure because of the fact that they finance a big chunk of Hamas. Or they are either directly or indirectly via the conduit, for the monies that go to Hamas. Secondly, because still the political arm of Hamas, if there is such a thing, sits in Qatar. One is gone, but they are still. I mean, the apparatus is there. So they have many more levers. And also they have Al Jazeera. And they exercise enormous influence in the Arab world and beyond because of Al Jazeera. That's something that is not being mentioned often. But that can change realities because you need to make a move. They need also the sort of public opinion there. So they have. Egypt has leverage, but less than Qatar. The leverage is essentially the extent to which they sort of are ready to collaborate with Israel with respect to the Philadelphia corridor, the Rafah passage, and so forth and so on. But they have less. They will have more in the future because they are willing, and actually they will benefit economically from reconstructing Gaza. And they are preparing for that. Actually, they see that as Egypt has a big interest in putting an end to the war because it's affecting their economy very badly because of the Houthis in the south, in the Gulf, that they're impeding the traffic through the Suez Canal, and the Suez Canal is a big source of income for Egypt. So they have an incentive to stop the war, but from their point of view, if they have to put pressure on Israel, that's fine, not necessarily on Hamas.
Manuel, for the past half hour now, we've been going pretty in-depth and taking a wide look at what all of the consequences, the pros and cons could be right now to a hostage deal. Before we wrap up, I want to do a little rapid-fire round and get your perspective. I'm going to ask a few quick questions, and I want you to respond with a one-word answer as quick as you can to these quick questions. I want your opinion. First, are these weekly protests, are they a threat to Israeli security?
Not at all.
Are the hostage families, are they helping or hurting the chance for a deal?
I think that's the wrong question. I mean, the families cannot act otherwise. I mean, that's something that is a sine qua non. So what I'm saying is we have to support the families. They're doing their best, and that's the way it should be.
What about the United States? Are they treating Israel with a double standard?
The U.S., in its foreign policy, first and foremost, has to serve the interests of the U.S., and it couldn't be otherwise. So I'm careful when I judge their policies because I'm aware of the fact that there is the superpower still in the world. They have their own interests. I have to be careful because, as much as we love the U.S. and we are allies, and there's so much interaction between the two countries. They have their own interests, we have our own.
And Hamas, do they have an incentive to reach a deal?
Right now, they're enjoying the show, as I said. But I think that as time goes by and they see that they are, by the day, losing ground and forces and and what's happening to the Palestinians in Gaza is horrible, okay, and they are responsible for that, okay, so I think that the pressure will mount.
Right now, is there hope for Israel?
There was never a question. I mean, Israel, the state of Israel was founded on a hope of 2,000 years, literally. That hope, that same hope, is ingrained in our national anthem. Okay, Ot lo avda tikvatenu. We have not lost hope, and that's, we sing that, we feel that every single day, and also in the Olympics when our flag is raised.
Professor Trajtenberg, on that exact message of hope, that's how I want to end our very first podcast here. There's a lot of reasons why Israel might not be hopeful, but I think you're absolutely right. The Israeli spirit lives on despite all of the adversities, and the main message right now is to still continue to stay together and continue to be hopeful.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nicole.
To all of our viewers, that wraps up our very first edition of the National Security Podcast here on I24 News. Make sure to join us every week for more of this in-depth analysis on some of the most pressing security issues facing Israel and the entire world today. For now, I'm Nicole Zedek, and thanks so much for listening to the National Security Podcast.